Right now, the atmosphere over the United States is doing something that forecasters don't use the word unprecedented for lightly, and this week, some of them are using it. What is unfolding across this country over the next several days is not a single storm, not a seasonal cold snap, not the kind of winter weather that makes for pretty photographs and school delay announcements. This is a sequence, a cascading, relentless, back-to-back assault on the infrastructure, the landscape, and the people of this country. And buried inside this pattern is something that genuinely should not exist in February. Something unusual is forming, and the atmosphere, right now, is in conflict with itself in a way that makes the outcomes deeply uncertain and potentially historic. To understand the scale of what's happening, you have to start above it. Miles above the surface, the jet stream, that great atmospheric river that steers every storm, every cold outbreak, every weather system across North America has buckled. Not slightly, not in the modest seasonal way it bends during a typical winter. It has contorted into a dramatic, sweeping trough that plunges from the Arctic deep into the southern United States. And that shape, that specific curvature, is the signature of an atmosphere preparing to do something violent. On one side of that trough, Arctic air of exceptional depth and density is pouring south out of Canada. On the other side, warm, saturated air loaded with Gulf moisture is surging northward. When those two air masses collide along the leading edge of that trough, the result is not just snow. It is organized atmospheric fury, and right now that collision is happening directly over the populated heart of this country. The first storm has already made its presence known, and what it has left behind is staggering. Across the Midwest, communities that thought they understood winter are being reminded that understanding something and surviving it are different things. Iowa, Nebraska, and northern Missouri woke up to roads that had simply ceased to function. Not just difficult to drive, but physically impassable, with drifts cutting across highways in walls of white that stopped trucks in their tracks. In Wisconsin and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, snowfall rates at the peak of the system reached 2 to 3 inches per hour, producing whiteout conditions so complete that visibility wasn't measured in feet. It was measured in car lengths. Parts of Minnesota recorded wind chills that pushed toward -40. Cold so profound that exposed skin registers damage in under 5 minutes. This was the opening act. But the opening act is already giving way to the second movement, and this is where it becomes dangerous in a way that the first storm was not. Because the second system is not simply a repeat of the first. It is stronger, more complex, and it is developing over a region of the country where the collision between Arctic air to the north and Gulf warmth to the south is most intense. Forecasters are watching closely as this system deepens with unusual speed over the southern plains, drawing energy from that sharp temperature contrast and organizing into a storm that is simultaneously threatening blizzard conditions across the Ohio River Valley and severe thunderstorms, potentially violent ones, across the warm sector to its south. This is the detail that stops meteorologists. The Ohio Valley, in February, is staring at a severe weather setup that looks nothing like February. The atmospheric instability building ahead of the storm system, fueled by Gulf moisture surging north and warm air overriding the cold boundary, is generating wind shear profiles and convective potential that would be alarming in late April. The parameters are there. The ingredients are aligned. And forecasters are saying what no one expects to say in the middle of winter, that tornado watches may be warranted across parts of Kentucky, Tennessee, and southern Indiana. The atmosphere is in conflict with itself most visibly here, in this narrow corridor where winter and spring are fighting for the same airspace, and when the atmosphere loses that fight, it releases energy in ways that are difficult to predict and even harder to prepare for. Meanwhile, something unusual is forming in the forecast models themselves, and that uncertainty is its own kind of danger. The two most powerful numerical weather prediction systems on Earth, the European model and the American GFS, are diverging in their solutions for the track and intensity of this second storm, and that divergence matters enormously for millions of people. The difference between those model solutions is the difference between a snowstorm and an ice storm for Pittsburgh. It is the difference between 3 inches and 18 inches for Philadelphia. It is the difference between the severe weather corridor setting up over Louisville or 200 miles to the north. What happens next could change quickly, and the 48 hours ahead are exactly the window where small errors in the forecast cascade into enormous real-world consequences. Travel is already being disrupted on a scale that airlines and highway systems are struggling to absorb. Hundreds of flights are grounded. Major interstates are being shut down proactively in states that rarely do so. The logistical machinery of daily American life is seizing under the weight of a storm that hasn't even peaked yet. And then there is the Northeast, bracing for what arrives on the back end of this second system with a combination of preparations and dread that the region knows well but never fully gets used to. Boston, Providence, Hartford, and Albany are looking at snowfall accumulations that, in some forecast scenarios, push into record territory for February events. The storm arrives on a region already taxed by the first system, already stretched thin in terms of plowing resources, road salt, and utility crews, and it does not care. Snow this heavy and this wet brings down power lines not from wind alone but from the sheer weight accumulating on branches and infrastructure, and once power goes out in a storm like this, in temperatures like these, the clock starts. How long before pipes freeze? How long before a house that was warm becomes uninhabitable? These are the calculations that emergency managers are running in real time, and the margins are not comfortable. This is where the human story of this pattern lives, not in the snowfall totals or the pressure readings, but in the cascading decisions and cascading failures that stack on top of each other when an infrastructure system is pushed past what it was designed to handle. A highway closure forces trucks onto secondary roads. Secondary roads, unplowed and icy, become accident scenes. Accident scenes block emergency vehicles. Emergency vehicles that can't move are emergency vehicles that can't respond. That chain of consequences, quietly and quickly, is already beginning to form in the regions hardest hit by the first storm, and the second storm is incoming before the first has released its grip. But what comes after the storms may be the most alarming chapter of all. Forecasters are watching closely as an Arctic air mass of rare intensity waits behind these systems, consolidating across the Canadian interior and preparing to surge south and east with a ferocity that the back end of a storm system allows by opening the atmospheric door. The temperature swings associated with this Arctic intrusion are the kind that strain comprehension. Cities in the Ohio Valley that experience temperatures in the middle 50s ahead of the severe weather threat will see those same temperatures plunge to single digits within 48 hours. 50, 55, 60-degree drops. In 2 days. The infrastructure that expands and contracts with temperature change, water mains, bridges, road surfaces, will be subjected to thermal stress that engineers would not design their systems to experience in such a compressed timeframe. Water main breaks will cascade. Bridges will ice over not during the storm, but after it, when the Arctic air flash freezes the standing water that the storm left behind. This is where it becomes dangerous for people who thought the worst was already over. And the Great Lakes, never passive in a pattern like this, will react to the incoming Arctic air with a fury of their own. Water temperatures across Erie and Ontario, still relatively warm after an inconsistent winter, will generate lake-effect snow bands of extraordinary intensity once that Arctic air streams across them. Downwind communities Buffalo, Watertown, Syracuse face the possibility of snowfall rates that exceed anything the back-to-back storms produced, with totals measured not in inches but in feet, arriving on top of ground already buried and in communities already exhausted. Something unusual is forming in the lake effect potential of this event, and forecasters are watching closely with a wariness that the numbers alone justify. The jet stream has not finished with this country. The pattern that created this sequence, the buckled, deeply contorted atmospheric configuration that opened this door, is not projected to relax in the extended range. Which means what you are watching unfold this week is not necessarily an ending. The atmosphere is still loaded. The Arctic reservoir is still deep. The Gulf moisture is still available. The ingredients that built this pattern remain in place. What comes next may be quieter. It may not be. The atmosphere right now is not making promises, and that silence, from a meteorological standpoint, may be the most unsettling detail of all.